Hello everyone and welcome. So in light of the new Star Wars series, The Acolyte, I decided to make a video on tackling the tragedy of Anakin Skywalker and the benefits of leaning into your character's flaws throughout your game. Character flaws are often overlooked in Dungeons & Dragons, and many people progress with their characters throughout campaigns and complete many challenges along the way, yet their character behaves like they did when they were level 1. An obvious example of this would be a character who is a bit of a hothead or is quick to anger and fight. Over time, you would expect them to work on this flaw and perhaps calm down and be less emotional, and maybe be a bit more rational and strategic in their approach, instead of being reckless with their actions. While skills have an obvious progression in Dungeons & Dragons, with characters increasing level and power, there isn't an obvious mechanic for character development or interpersonal skills that affect how a PC thinks, feels and behaves throughout the game. I understand this type of character development isn't for everyone, but if you enjoy role-playing and thinking about how your character may adapt and change in response to certain events, it will bring a bit of realism to your game, and this is only a good thing, as it means you'll be more invested in playing your characters and of course the game and storyline. At the beginning of the game you obviously create your backstory, and in D&D there is a section for flaws to offer a scaffold for building a complex character, but that's about it. There is no guidance or mechanics that offers advice on how to overcome or succumb to these flaws. In other words, there is nothing that forces you to think about your character becoming a worse or better person. Their character arc just remains flat the entire time. It neither goes up or down or reaches completion. But what does a complex character with flaws look like? Well, if you've watched Star Wars, Anakin Skywalker is a perfect example of a complex character with many wants, needs and flaws, which are played out over a complex and rich storyline. When developing or coming up with ideas about flaws, you can choose how far back you go. Do the flaws your character has stem from their childhood experiences? So with our Anakin Skywalker example, we know a huge amount of responsibility and pressure was placed on him at a young age. He was a chosen one, destined to bring balance to the Force. Not only did he have this pressure, but it was taken away from his mother, whom he had already spent 9 years of his life with, and was further isolated by being treated differently by his peers and mentors. Yes, he was much more powerful than other children his age, despite receiving no training, but he still was a child who did not have a choice in the life that was laid out for him. If that doesn't pave the way for bitterness and resentment, as he ages, I don't know what will. Also, if you think about his childhood, Anakin was born into slavery. It was the only thing he knew for the first 9 years of his life, and something that was deeply traumatising for him. As he gets older, he avoids conversations about his experiences, and often suppresses those memories altogether. If we think about it, he never really had time to process what happened. He was plucked from his home planet and suddenly became the chosen one. He often lashes out when confronted about his childhood in slavery, and isn't even comfortable talking about it with his wife, which is completely understandable. Now, I could probably make a whole video on how slavery impacted Anakin's character arc, but I think I've covered the general overview here. Next, I'm going to talk about Shmi Skywalker, Anakin's mother. I think what happened to his mother laid the foundations for his turn to the dark side, but I'm open to discussion on this. So we think about the oppressive and cruel environment Anakin and his mother survived, and how nurturing she was. It's no surprise that he would do anything in his power to protect her, when he got in a position to do so. And all the more reason her death and the way she died left a scar. Also, if we think about Anakin's good qualities, his kindness and empathy, we can see they were all instilled by his mother, and it's all the more sad that her death was an early catalyst for making him receptive to Sith's influence and manipulation. Shmi's death is arguably the first time Anakin begins to fear losing the ones he loves, and it's this fear that the Sith uses as leverage. Next we have Anakin's, let's say, emotional disposition, and how it's incompatible with the Jedi Code, which is pretty much a practice in emotional detachment and finding peace and discipline. However, Anakin is not in control of his emotions. He's impulsive and chaotic, which is a given considering his childhood experiences. Also, if we go back to Anakin's life when he was a slave, he was very attached to his mother and had a very deep emotional connection with her, because she was all he had. He later forms similar deep connections, and one might say complicated relationships, with his master Obi-Wan and wife, but this wasn't his fault. After all, he was recruited as a child and offered an escape from slavery. Who wouldn't take up that opportunity? If we look deeper at his relationship with Obi-Wan, who is basically an embodiment of the Jedi Code, their relationship is akin to father-son or brother-to-brother, depending on whose perspective you take. Obi-Wan is torn between the Jedi way and his relationship with Anakin. For example, he knows about his relationship with Padme, yet turns a blind eye to it because it makes Anakin happy. However, we all know what eventually happens between the two of them. What began as a tale of mentorship and brotherhood ended in failure and guilt. Speaking of guilt, there was plenty of that between Anakin and his wife Padme. Keeping their relationship secret took its toll on her, and him too. This is what the Sith used to lure him to the dark side. They played on his fear of losing her, which goes all the way back to the pain he suffered when he lost his mother Shmi. Moreover, his turn to the dark side contributed to Padme's death, and he also became quite violent when she confronted him about it, which made this whole ordeal even more tragic. When Padme dies, he isn't strong enough to withstand that loss, and it left a greater wound than when he lost his mother. Anakin's life as Darth Vader is the most significant chapter of his life. With all the heinous acts he's done, and has to live with, he's essentially been robbed of his humanity. He is a slave once again, except this time his master is the Emperor. Despite all the power Darth Vader now possesses, he has lost his freedom. Anakin Skywalker, after all, was meant to destroy the Sith, not join them, to paraphrase Obi-Wan. Darth Vader, however, in some parts tries to redeem himself in the end and acts on the one shred of humanity he has left, which is to sacrifice himself to protect his son Luke. This also fulfills the prophecy of Anakin being the chosen one, to destroy the Sith and bring balance to the Force. He doesn't die as Darth Vader, but as Anakin Skywalker. Now, this has been quite a whistle-stop tour of Anakin Skywalker's flaws and character backstory. I do realise he was also intensely jealous, egotistical, guilt-ridden, and carried a sense of shame. However, I would consider his fatal flaw to be fear, or more precisely, fear of losing the ones he loves. It's this fear that drives him to commit hideous acts of violence, and essentially is what consumes him as he fully embraces the dark side. So if we related this back to building a Dungeons & Dragons character, you don't need to just stick with one flaw and overcome it, then consider the completion of your character's arc. You can introduce many flaws throughout the game, and it might help to chat through these with your GM, as they could even contribute to any future plots they have in mind. Also think about fatal flaws and how they define your character. With Anakin, it's fear, but what will yours be? For example, if your character was prideful, would their arrogance be their downfall? Or is it greed? Will they stop at nothing to acquire wealth and status? Misplaced trust is another great fatal flaw. Has their family abandoned them or double-crossed them, for example? I find flaws the most interesting aspect of developing a character, as you'll never know how or if they will overcome them. Also, I'd highly recommend choosing a mix of flaws, as it's more realistic of people in real life. They don't have to be overly complex. Maybe your character has a touch of jealousy, and they're also quite prideful. In terms of fatal flaws, however, usually there is just one, even when other flaws appear to be fatal. A fatal flaw is something the character has to overcome, and if they don't, it will consume them. Right everyone, that's all I have to say on flaws for today's video. Let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one.